My name is Lucy, I am 28 years old, and when I turned 21, I had my world flipped upside down. It wasn't the typical coming-of-age moment where you step into adulthood. No, this was far more sinister. That was the year I discovered that my parents had taken out thousands of dollars in credit cards and loans in my name, using my social security number. At first, I couldn't believe it. It didn't seem real. How could my parents do something so cruel, so reckless? But the more I looked into it, the clearer it became. My credit was destroyed. I was left with mountains of debt I never signed up for, no way to prove my innocence, and a future that seemed uncertain. For as long as I could remember, my parents had always been the pillars of my life, the foundation I built everything upon. They were the ones who taught me about right and wrong, who told me that family was everything. My mother, always the nurturing one, made sure I knew that love was unconditional. And my father had this way of making everything feel safe. He was charming, confident, and he always knew how to make things work. Even when things seemed tough, Dad would smile and say, "Don't worry, Lucy. We've got this." And for years, I believed him. I trusted him more than anyone else in my life. That trust was like a shield I wore, making me feel invincible. But when I turned 21, everything came crashing down. I was just beginning to get a taste of adulthood, figuring out how to balance school with part-time jobs, managing my own life without the constant hovering of my parents. It was supposed to be a time of new beginnings. Instead, I was hit with a nightmare. The first inkling that something was wrong came when I tried to apply for a student loan. It should have been a simple process. I had decent grades, a steady part-time job, and no reason to believe I wouldn't qualify. But when the lender checked my credit score, I was hit with a shock I could never have prepared for. My credit score was abysmal, nothing like what it should have been for someone my age with little debt and a steady income. I called my bank, trying to understand what had happened, and that's when the first pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. I learned that there were several open credit cards in my name, credit cards I'd never applied for, loans that I didn't know about, with monthly payments I couldn't afford. And worse still, the accounts were all maxed out, leaving me with a trail of unpaid bills that stretched back years. The numbers didn't lie. Someone had used my personal information, and it wasn't just a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. At first, I thought maybe it was identity theft. I went online, read articles, and called the credit agencies, trying to get some kind of direction on how to fix it. But when I started looking deeper into the accounts and dates, something didn't add up. These were not strangers trying to steal my identity. These were loans and credit cards that had been opened with my social security number. The more I dug, the clearer it became that my parents were behind it. My mind struggled to process this.
How could they do this to me?
How could they have put me in this kind of position? The worst part was how they acted when I confronted them. At first, they tried to deny it. My mother looked at me with those wide eyes, trying to act innocent, but I could see the guilt in her face. Then my father, always the one who could talk his way out of anything, calmly said, "Lucy, don't get upset. It was all part of a bigger plan, a family investment. We're doing this for you." Family investment? The words felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could they justify this? All my life, I had been taught that family looked out for one another, that honesty and loyalty were everything. But here I was, staring at my parents, and they were telling me that ruining my financial future was somehow a family investment. I felt a deep, sickening betrayal that I couldn't put into words. It was like they had completely rewritten the definition of family, and I wasn't a part of this new, twisted version. They went on to explain that this was all for the future. They painted a picture of a family plan that had been set into motion years ago. The credit cards, the loans, they said it was all part of securing our future. That maybe one day, I'd be grateful for what they had done, and that I'd see it as a stepping stone. But as I listened to them, my stomach turned. I wasn't some pawn in their game, and I didn't want to be part of their twisted scheme. I wanted control over my life, my finances, my future. And they had taken all of that away from me without a second thought. They claimed I had agreed to it. They insisted that I had signed some documents, maybe even verbally agreed to the loans when I was younger. But I didn't remember anything like that. The more they spoke, the more they tried to twist the truth, the more I felt like I was losing myself. My own parents, my flesh and blood, were trying to make me out to be the bad guy in this. They were telling me that it was my fault, that I was being ungrateful, that I was blowing things out of proportion. They even had the audacity to tell me that this kind of thing happens in families and that I should just let it go and move on. That was when I realized just how deep their manipulation went. They had always been good at making me feel like everything was my fault, like I was the one who needed to be better, to try harder, to make them proud. And now, they were trying to gaslight me into believing that I had willingly participated in this financial mess. They didn't even see it as wrong. To them, it was all part of some grand plan that only they could see. But it wasn't my plan, and I couldn't let them get away with it. It was in that moment, when I felt completely alone and helpless, that I realized I had to fight. I had to expose the truth, not just for me, but for anyone who might be caught in a situation like this. I couldn't let them destroy my future, my credit, my peace of mind, just because they thought they knew what was best for me. I had to take them to court. But even as I made that decision, the weight of it settled heavily on my shoulders. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about proving my parents were wrong. It was about fighting my entire upbringing, fighting the foundation I had always relied on. I had always thought that family was supposed to be the one thing you could count on, but now I had to face the painful truth. The people I had trusted most in the world were the very ones who had betrayed me. Still, I couldn't give up. I couldn't let them win. I had to find a way to fight back, to reclaim what they had taken from me. But what if I failed? What if I couldn't prove my innocence? What if, in the end, I was the one who lost everything? I didn't know how things would turn out. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let my parents take any more from me. Not my future. Not my identity. And not my sense of self. I was done being the victim. Now, I was going to take control, no matter what it cost. Fighting back was my only choice, so I took them to court. It was me against them, their lawyer, and a sea of legal paperwork I didn't understand. The whole process felt suffocating, and every step forward felt like 2 steps back. I sat across from my parents in the courtroom, my heart pounding, fighting back tears as they played the role of innocent, well-meaning parents. Their lawyer twisted the narrative, painting me as an ungrateful daughter who was trying to cheat them out of what they'd invested in me. The room was stark and cold, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken judgments. I could feel the eyes of the court on me, my every movement scrutinized. My hands were clammy, and my chest felt tight as I nervously shifted in my seat. It was hard to focus, especially with the gavel still fresh in my mind. The sound of it was like a ticking clock, each moment drawing me closer to the crushing reality that my parents' lies might win this battle. I wanted to scream, to run out of that courtroom and never look back, but I couldn't. I had to stay strong. I had to stand my ground, even if it felt like the world was spinning out of control. My parents looked so calm, so collected, sitting side by side, dressed in their best suits. They were playing their parts perfectly, pretending to be the caring, concerned parents who were only trying to help me. But I knew better. I could see through their act. My father, ever the charmer, had his usual confident smile, while my mother sat there with a soft, placid expression, her hands folded neatly in front of her. They were pretending that everything was fine, as if I wasn't sitting there fighting for my life, my future, my dignity. Their lawyer, a tall man with slicked back hair and a voice like polished marble, was working the room like a pro. He spun his arguments with such ease, making it sound like I was the one in the wrong. It was as if my pain, my anger, my shattered trust meant nothing to him. The lawyer painted me as an ungrateful daughter who didn't appreciate what they'd done for me, who was trying to cheat them out of the money they had invested in my future. I was stunned by how easily he twisted the truth. How could anyone listen to this and believe it? But the court didn't know me. They didn't know the years of manipulation, the gaslighting, the times when my parents made me feel like I was never enough, and everything I did for them was somehow never enough either. How could I explain that to people who didn't understand what it was like to grow up under their roof? My lawyer sat next to me, but I barely felt his presence. I could barely hear him over the pounding in my ears. He had his own doubts, I could tell. He was a good lawyer, and I was grateful for him, but I knew deep down that no amount of legal jargon could fix the damage my parents had caused. It wasn't just the financial mess they had made of my life. It was the emotional wreckage, the way they had poisoned my sense of self and my trust in the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the truth. The judge seemed to buy it, or at least that's how it felt. Every time I caught his eye, I could feel his skepticism seeping through the space between us. His gaze was cool, detached, almost clinical. His brow furrowed slightly as he listened to the arguments, but there was no sign of empathy. No sign that he understood the gravity of the situation. How could he? The idea that a child's own parents could betray her in this way seemed almost unimaginable, even to someone trained to be impartial. How could I convince him, when I had no proof, and they were so convincing in their lies? It felt like everything was stacked against me. They had the experience. They had the charm. They had the years of practice in manipulating others. And I was just this young woman, fighting for something that no one else seemed to care about. My future. My identity. The sense of self that my parents had taken from me. The system seemed to favor them, and I felt smaller and smaller with each passing moment. My heart sank every time I saw the judge's skeptical expression. It was as though he couldn't quite believe what I was saying. Or maybe he just couldn't wrap his head around the idea that someone, anyone, could be so deceived by the people they trusted most. Every time the judge looked at me like that, it felt like a judgment against my entire life. My entire experience. The years of silence and shame I had carried in my heart. Every painful memory of being betrayed by the people I loved most seemed to flicker in my mind, like a series of images I couldn't escape. I felt like I was drowning in all the things I couldn't say. The words I had tried to say to my parents for years, the things I had been too afraid to confront, were all coming to the surface now, and it felt like no one was listening. How could I convince him when I had no evidence to back up the emotional toll this had taken on me? I had no paper trail of the gaslighting, the subtle manipulation, the moments when my parents made me feel like I was overreacting, like I was the problem. They had covered their tracks too well, too carefully. It was their word against mine, and all I had was my gut feeling that something wasn't right. But how could I explain that gut feeling in a way that would make someone believe me? How could I explain the years of confusion, the years of self-doubt, the way I second-guessed every decision I made because my parents had made me feel like I couldn't trust myself? I could feel the walls closing in. It was suffocating, like being trapped in a room with no windows, no doors, and no way out. Every moment of this court case felt like an eternity. Every day, I left the courthouse feeling more defeated than the last. The weight of the legal jargon, the back and forth of the arguments, the unblinking eyes of the judge, all of it pressed down on me, making it harder and harder to breathe. I couldn't sleep at night, couldn't focus on anything else. All I could think about was the case, my parents, the lies they had told, and the sense that I was fighting a losing battle. The days blurred together, each one seeming like a repeat of the last. I could feel my hope slipping away, little by little. I had no solid evidence to back me up. I had no witnesses. It was just me, standing alone against a sea of professional, convincing people. My parents had always known how to manipulate situations to their advantage, and they were doing it again. They were pretending to be the victims, pretending to care, and I was the one who was being painted as the villain. But even though it felt like I was losing, I couldn't give up. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them destroy everything I had worked for, everything that was still worth fighting for. Despite the judge's skepticism, despite the weight of the case pressing down on me, I held on to the one thing I knew for sure, the truth. No matter how hard it was, no matter how much I doubted myself, I knew the truth. I knew what they had done, and I was determined to make sure that the world knew it too. Just when I thought there was no way out, I remembered Barnaby. Barnaby was my childhood teddy bear, the one my father had given me when I was little. I don't know why it popped into my head, but I suddenly thought of something my dad had told me when he handed it to me all those years ago. He said, "Barnaby will always listen." It sounded so simple at the time, like a cute thing to say to a child, but now it hit me like a bolt of lightning. I wasn't sure what I would find, but I had to try. I had a technician examine Barnaby and we found a small, hidden recording device inside of him. I could hardly believe it. What had my parents been doing all these years? I didn't know what the recording would contain, but it was the only hope I had left. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about that teddy bear. Barnaby had been with me for as long as I could remember, his fur matted from years of hugs, one button eye slightly loose, his left ear a little torn from a childhood tantrum. He was more than just a toy to me. He was comfort, innocence, and a piece of my past that I had always held close. Even after I'd moved out, Barnaby came with me. He sat on the corner of my bed or on a shelf nearby, a quiet reminder of simpler times. I never thought that the one object symbolizing my childhood would also become the key to uncovering my parents' darkest secret. The thought came to me one night as I sat alone, drowning in legal papers and despair. I was surrounded by documents I didn't understand, by accusations and lies that seemed to twist tighter around me every day. I felt small and defeated. My parents' lawyer had made me out to be some kind of monster, and the judge's skeptical gaze haunted me. That's when my mind drifted back to something my father had said when I was a little girl. I could still hear his voice, soft, affectionate, the way fathers talk to their daughters when they tuck them into bed. "Barnaby will always listen," he had said, his smile warm as he placed the teddy bear into my tiny hands. I had laughed, thinking it was just something sweet, an adult trying to make his daughter feel safe. I used to talk to Barnaby about everything: school, my dreams, even the times I cried after being scolded. He was my silent friend, the one who never interrupted, never judged. But now, as that line replayed in my mind, something about it felt different. The words took on a sinister echo. Barnaby will always listen. Always. Why had he said that so pointedly? Why had that memory been buried for so long, only to resurface now? My chest tightened as I thought about it, and a strange mix of fear and curiosity started to build inside me. At first, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Why would there be anything strange about a teddy bear? It was old, worn, and stuffed with cotton. Nothing more. But the thought wouldn't leave me. I sat on my bed, staring at Barnaby, my hands trembling. Something deep inside me whispered that I needed to know. I picked him up and held him close, just like I used to when I was a child. His fabric smelled faintly of lavender from all the years he'd been in storage. I turned him over, examining every stitch, every seam. Nothing looked unusual at first, but when I pressed behind his ear, I felt something hard, something that didn't belong. My breath caught in my throat. My hands grew cold as I ran my fingers over the spot again. It wasn't my imagination. There was something there. That's when I decided to get help. I didn't want to destroy him, not yet. So, I took Barnaby to a technician who specialized in small electronics. I told him it was part of a family project and that I wanted to check if there was anything hidden inside. He looked at me oddly, but agreed to take a look. The moment he started examining the bear, I couldn't sit still. My heart raced, my palms were slick with sweat, and I kept replaying that one sentence in my head: Barnaby will always listen. Minutes passed like hours. Then the technician looked up, his expression serious. "There's something inside," he said quietly. "Something electronic." My stomach dropped. He carefully opened a small seam near the bear's ear, and what he pulled out made my entire body go numb. A tiny, metallic recording device, old but still functional. I stared at it in disbelief. A recording device, hidden inside my childhood teddy bear. I could hardly believe it. My mind was spinning. My heart thudded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. What had my parents been doing all these years? Why would they put something like this inside my teddy bear? The thought was horrifying. How long had it been there? What had it recorded? The idea that my most private moments, my bedtime talks, my fears, my secrets, might have been captured by that small device made me feel sick. I asked the technician if he could extract any data from it, and he nodded, saying he would try. I sat there watching him work, every second stretching into eternity. My hands fidgeted with the edge of my sleeve, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe it didn't even work anymore. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. My parents had always been controlling, always needed to know everything about me. Could this have been their way of keeping tabs on me even as a child? As the technician connected the device to his equipment, I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that whatever came out of that device could change everything. My breathing was shallow, my throat dry. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. When he finally managed to retrieve the audio, he didn't say a word, just handed me a pair of headphones. My fingers trembled as I put them on. I hesitated, terrified of what I might hear. I pressed play.
Static.
Then faint voices. My breath hitched. I could recognize them instantly, my parents. My father's deep, familiar tone. My mother's laughter. At first, it sounded harmless, like an ordinary conversation. But then, the words became clearer. They were laughing about me. Laughing about how they had fooled me, about how they had used my credit to get what they wanted. My father's voice was almost proud, smug even, as he talked about how easy it was to convince me of anything. My mother joined in, her laughter light and cruel, as she mentioned the vacation they were planning, paid for by my name, my credit, my future. Tears filled my eyes. My chest ached with a pain so deep it felt physical. I wanted to rip the headphones off, to stop listening, but I couldn't. I needed to hear it. I needed proof. Every word felt like a dagger, each laugh another twist of the knife. The people I had loved and trusted most in the world had been mocking me, using me, betraying me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. I pulled the headphones off, my hands shaking. I could barely speak. My entire body felt cold, hollow, as if the floor had disappeared beneath me. The technician looked at me with concern, but I couldn't form words. All I could manage to whisper was, "Can you make a copy of that recording?" As I walked out of the shop, clutching Barnaby to my chest, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. The grief was for the little girl who had once believed in her father's promise, that Barnaby would always listen to protect her. The relief was that for once he really had listened, and now he would help me tell the truth. For years I had felt voiceless. Now I had proof. I didn't know what the court would say. I didn't know if the judge would believe me. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Barnaby, my silent friend, had finally spoken. And his voice, our voice, might just be the one that set me free. In the courtroom, I stood up and presented Barnaby. The room fell quiet as I explained how my father had given it to me and how he'd said it would always listen. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued, but still skeptical. I asked the technician to play the recording, and as the audio filled the courtroom, I felt my pulse race. My hands shook as I held Barnaby close, the very same teddy bear that had been my comfort for so many years, now transformed into the unexpected weapon that would expose the truth. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, their attention pinning me in place as I slowly made my way to the front of the court. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air heavy with anticipation. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, but my heart beat faster than I could control. The moment I spoke, the room seemed to hush even more. I wasn't sure if it was the gravity of the situation or the sheer absurdity of the idea that a childhood teddy bear, something so innocently part of me, could become the linchpin in this entire case. My voice felt thick, strained with emotion as I recounted the history of Barnaby, that small, simple gift from my father all those years ago. This bear, Barnaby, was a gift from my father when I was just a little girl. I remember him saying, "Barnaby will always listen." The judge's brow furrowed. I saw the skepticism in his eyes, the kind of doubt you get when you're trying to make sense of something that sounds too strange to be true. But I didn't waver. This was my only chance. I knew that the burden of proof was on me, and I was ready to let this strange piece of my past reveal the truth. With a shaky breath, I turned to the technician, who was seated at a table near the front. He was ready, his hands steady as he prepared to play the recording. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me, on this teddy bear, on the fragile moment that had the power to change everything. When the technician pressed play, the first thing that struck me was the sudden silence that took over the courtroom. It wasn't just quiet, it was as if time itself had stopped. For a brief moment, I could only hear the soft hum of the recorder, the stillness pressing in on me. Then, the unmistakable sound of my parents' voices began to fill the room. My mother's voice was first, light and airy. "It's amazing how easy it was," she said, her tone almost gleeful. She never even questioned us. And then my father, with his deep, familiar laugh. "She's so trusting. I can't believe she didn't see it coming. We could have used her credit for anything, and she'd never know." I felt my throat tighten, my chest constrict. Hearing their voices, laughing at me, mocking me, it was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a betrayal of love. I had always seen my parents as the ones who protected me, who looked out for me. But now, here they were, treating me like a pawn in a game they were playing for their own gain. The room was so still, I could almost hear every word reverberate off the walls. The audio continued, and they discussed the details of their deception, the way they had used my credit to fund their own desires, buying things I never saw, spending money they never earned. They talked about their plans for a vacation, a getaway they were going to take using the very identity they had stolen from me. I could hear the disdain in my father's voice when he referred to me, calling me naive and foolish. "She'll never know," he said. "She's too innocent to realize what's happening. We've got her figured out." My heart cracked. How could they say those things about me? How could they mock me so openly? The same man who had promised to always protect me, the same woman who had comforted me when I was scared, had been betraying me for years. They had used my identity like it was nothing more than a tool to get what they wanted. And I had been too blind to see it. The laughter continued, casual and cruel, and it felt like every word was a slap in the face. My mind raced, and for a moment, I wasn't in that courtroom anymore. I was back in my childhood bedroom, holding Barnaby close as I tried to block out the painful reality of what my parents had done. How had they gotten to this point? When had I stopped being their daughter and become just another way for them to get ahead? But there was no turning back now. The truth had been spoken, and it hung in the air like an undeniable force. The audio kept playing, and my parents' plans for even more financial fraud were laid bare. They talked about how they were going to use my social security number for more loans, more credit cards, more schemes to fund their endless desires. It was like they had never seen me as their child at all, but rather as a vessel to carry their selfish ambitions. The room went deathly silent. It was as if the weight of the evidence had hit everyone at once, and no one knew what to say. My parents' smugness, their casual cruelty, had been exposed in the most unexpected way, through the one thing they had never considered: a small, childhood teddy bear. I could see the shock on the judge's face. His expression shifted from skepticism to disbelief, and then to something more solemn. He didn't need to hear anything else. The truth was there, plain and simple. The recording had done what my words and my lawyer's arguments couldn't. It had cut through the lies and shown exactly who my parents were. It was a moment I had longed for, but it didn't bring me the relief I thought it would. Instead, I felt numb. My stomach was in knots, my hands still trembling from the effort it took to get to this point. I had done it. The truth was out. But the reality of what had just happened hit me all at once. These were my parents, the people I had loved, the people I had trusted. And now, they were sitting across from me, caught in their own web of lies. The judge sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving my parents as he processed the weight of the evidence before him. He had been a silent witness to their betrayal, their greed, and their cruelty. And I could tell that he, too, understood the significance of this moment. It wasn't just about the loans or the debt or the financial ruin they had caused me. It was about something far more profound, the violation of a parent's duty to protect their child. The courtroom remained still. The hushed whispers of disbelief passed between the onlookers, the spectators who had been watching this case unfold. I felt their eyes on me, their pity, their judgment, but there was no turning back now. This wasn't just my victory, It was a public unraveling of everything my parents had built their lives on. Their lies, their manipulation, their control, they had all crumbled in the span of a few minutes. And as their deceit hung in the air, I realized just how much I had been carrying all these years. I wasn't just fighting for my financial future. I was fighting for my dignity, for the right to reclaim my identity from the people who had stolen it. In that silence, in that one moment, the weight of everything I had endured, the years of uncertainty, the nights of doubt, the constant fear of betrayal, finally felt like it had been validated. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. My parents had done this to me, and now the world knew. The judge's gavel finally broke the silence. It was swift, precise, and final. The truth had won. My parents had been caught, and their web of lies had crumbled. For the first time in so long, I could breathe. I could stand tall and know that justice had been served. But even as I felt that small flicker of victory, the hollow ache inside me remained. I had lost so much in this fight. Years of trust, a sense of security, the belief that family was something sacred. But at least now I had my truth back. And that, for me, was worth everything.